The blinding flash of hundreds of cameras stung less than my husband's triumphant smirk as he announced our divorce on the global stage. He believed throwing me out of the skyscraper bearing his name would destroy me. He had no idea that the magnificent tower where he stood had changed owners 2 weeks ago. As the security doors slammed shut behind me, my legal trap snapped into place, transforming that arrogant CEO into a trespasser within his very own empire. My name is Elena Vance, and I stood in the heavy shadows of the backstage wings, smoothing the fabric of my black velvet evening gown. The air inside the Stratosphere Dynamics headquarters in Chicago hummed with the electric anticipation of a billion-dollar product launch. I adjusted the diamond bracelet on my wrist, believing I was there to stand beside my husband as we cut the ribbon on the future we had built together. I checked my reflection in a glass panel one last time, ensuring every strand of hair was perfect for the cameras, unaware that I was merely a prop in a cruel play. Then the spotlights shifted, cutting through the darkness. Julian Thorne walked onto the center stage, radiating the charisma that had once made me fall in love with him. He held the microphone with a practiced ease, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, looking every bit the master of the universe. But he was not alone. Bella Sterling, the director of communications, stood uncomfortably close to him. Her smile was sharp, carrying a malicious secret I was about to learn the hard way. Julian raised a hand to silence the thunderous applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, Stratosphere Dynamics is about evolution," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "To optimize our performance, we are initiating a total restructuring. This applies not only to our personnel, but to the personal life of the CEO as well." I frowned, confused by the deviation from the script. Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind him flickered. It did not display the new microchip schematic or the projected earnings graph. Instead, a high-resolution image of a legal document appeared. It was a divorce petition, signed unilaterally. The words, "financial burden and unsuitable for future direction," were highlighted in bold red letters for the entire world to see. My breath caught in my throat as the room gasped. Before I could process the shock, Bella Sterling stepped out of the spotlight and walked toward the wing where I stood. She feigned a look of concern for the live-streaming drones hovering above us, making sure the camera captured her act of charity. "Oh, Elena, you poor thing," she whispered loudly enough for the microphones to catch, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Julian thought you might need this. It is all you really brought to the table, isn't it?" She shoved a worn, tattered grocery bag into my hands. It was old and dirty, creating a stark contrast against my velvet dress. I looked inside to see nothing but a toothbrush and a few used travel-sized bottles. I stared at the bag, then up at the stage. Julian did not look at me. He simply nodded to the side. 2 large security guards stepped forward. I recognized them immediately. They were Mike and Dave. I had given them both generous cash bonuses from my own savings last Christmas so they could buy gifts for their children. Now they refused to meet my eyes. "I am sorry, Mrs. Thorne," Mike muttered, gripping my arm with unnecessary force. "Mr. Thorne says you are trespassing on company property." The ballroom erupted not in outrage, but in amusement. I saw the faces of women I had hosted at charity galas and men who had eaten at my dinner table. They covered their mouths with champagne flutes to hide their snickers. To them, the public destruction of my life was merely an intermission entertainment, a spicy anecdote for their next brunch. They whispered and pointed, delighted by the spectacle of the CEO discarding his wife like a piece of obsolete hardware. I did not scream. I did not beg. I straightened my spine and looked past the guards, locking eyes directly with Julian. He expected tears. He expected a scene that would validate his narrative of me being an emotional liability. Instead, I gave him a look of profound pity. It was the look one gives to a child playing with matches near a barrel of gunpowder. For a second, his arrogant smile faltered. He shifted his weight, unsettled by my silence. "Get her out!" he barked into the microphone, his voice cracking slightly. The guards shoved me forward. I was marched through the lobby like a criminal. They thrust me through the revolving glass doors with a final push. I stumbled onto the cold pavement outside. The heavy glass swished shut behind me, sealing off the warmth and light of the tower. My high heels clicked sharply against the freezing stone as thunder rumbled overhead. The storm was breaking over Chicago, but it was nothing compared to the hurricane I was about to unleash upon Julian Thorne. I stood motionless as the freezing Chicago rain soaked through my velvet gown, turning the heavy fabric into an icy cage against my skin. I tilted my head back to look up at the Stratosphere Dynamics Tower. The skyscraper pierced the night sky, glowing like a beacon of success that I was no longer allowed to touch. It was a cruel monolith of glass and steel, warm and bright on the inside, while I was left shivering in the dark. My phone, still clutched tightly in my trembling hand, buzzed incessantly against my palm. I looked down at the screen through the droplets of water. Notifications were flooding in by the thousands. The video of my humiliation was already trending on every major platform. The headline made my stomach turn billionaire CEO's trophy wife kicked to the curb. The comments scrolling past were vicious. Strangers were celebrating my downfall, calling me a gold digger who finally got what she deserved. I closed my eyes, letting the rain wash away the tears before they could fall. It was ironic how the world saw me as a leech. 5 years ago, I was not a trophy. I was a lead architect at a prestigious firm, designing skylines while Julian was just a man with a slide deck and a dream he could not afford. I remembered the night he convinced me to give it all up. We were sitting on the floor of my small apartment, eating cheap takeout because that was all his budget allowed. He had taken my hands in his eyes burning with that same intense charisma I saw on stage tonight. "Elena, baby, I can't do this without you," he had said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "You have the vision, I have the drive. Let me handle the business. You be my rock. We will build an empire, but I need you fully in my corner. Quit the firm. Invest in us." I believed him. I poured my life savings into his startup. I resigned from my job to manage his life, his image, and his home. But slowly, the partnership shifted. Our money became company assets that I could not touch without permission. My friends were slowly replaced by the wives of business associates. I became an ornament, brought out to shine at galas and put back in a box when the guests left. And then there was Bella. The signs had been there for months. I smelled the scent of Chanel No. 5, a perfume I never wore, lingering on his collar after late nights at the office. I noticed the sudden, urgent business trips to Paris and Milan, where Bella just happened to be the only available press officer. And the way she looked at me during board meetings, a smirk that said she knew exactly when my expiration date was coming. I looked down at the wretched, dirty bag Bella had shoved into my hands. I pulled it open, hoping for a credit card or maybe some cash for a taxi. There was nothing. No wallet. No ID. Just an old burner phone I kept for emergencies and a thick yellow envelope. He had stripped me of everything, leaving me stranded in the rain without a single dollar to my name. The sound of a roaring engine broke through the rhythm of the falling rain. It was not the smooth purr of a Lamborghini or the electric hum of a Tesla, which lined the valet circle like a row of sharks. It was a coughing, sputtering growl. A rusted, beat-up Ford F-150 pickup truck screeched to a halt right in front of the main entrance, blocking a gleaming Ferrari. The contrast was so sharp it almost made me laugh. The driver's door groaned as it was kicked open. A man stepped out, ignoring the valet who was rushing over to shoo him away. He was wearing a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit, his work boots heavy on the wet pavement. His gray hair was matted with rain, but his posture was as rigid as steel. It was my father, Robert Vance. He did not look at the building. He did not look at the security guards who were nervously fingering their earpieces. He looked only at me. His eyes, usually crinkled with laughter, were now burning with a terrifying mixture of rage for them and heartbreak for me. "Get in the truck. Ellie," he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. "Let's get you out of this garbage dump." "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking for the first time that night. "Don't you say a word," he said, walking over and wrapping a rough, calloused arm around my shivering shoulders to shield me from the cold. "You don't explain yourself to anyone. Not tonight." The cabin of the truck smelled like stale coffee and cheap tobacco, a scent that had clung to the upholstery for 20 years. To anyone else, it might have been pungent, but to me, it was the smell of safety. It was far more comforting than the sterile, lavender-infused air of the multi-million-dollar penthouse I had been banished from minutes ago. As the heater blasted warm air against my frozen skin, I finally stopped shaking. My father, Robert, did not bombard me with questions. He did not ask why I was wet or why my husband had just publicly executed our marriage on live television. He simply reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick, worn cotton towel. "Let's go home, kiddo," he said, his voice gruff but laced with a gentle warmth. "The chessboard. It is all set." We drove away from the blinding lights of the city, heading deep into the quiet suburbs. The storm hammered against the windshield, but the old Ford plowed through the puddles with a reliability that Julian's Italian sports cars could never muster. We pulled up to a modest, single-story wooden house. It was simple, sturdy, and entirely paid for the place where I had scraped my knees and learned to draw my first blueprints. Inside, the house was warm and silent. I went straight to the bathroom and scrubbed the expensive makeup off my face until my skin was raw and clean. I peeled off the heavy, sodden velvet gown and kicked it into the corner. I pulled on a pair of oversized gray sweatpants and a faded college hoodie. As the soft fabric enveloped me, I felt the persona of Mrs. Thorne dissolve. I was just Elena again. When I walked into the living room, my father was already busy. He had pushed aside the old Persian rug and pulled up a loose floorboard to reveal a hidden floor safe. It was an ancient thing, heavy and iron, but it guarded secrets worth more than stratosphere dynamics itself. He spun the dial with calloused, grease-stained fingers and pulled the heavy door open. He retrieved a thick stack of documents bound in a leather folder and placed it on the coffee table. The cover was stamped with a red seal, Vance Industrial Trust. Most people looked at Robert Vance and saw a retired mechanic who spent his days tinkering with old engines. Julian certainly did. He saw a blue-collar nobody. He never bothered to look deeper, never knew that the man in the jumpsuit had quietly purchased massive swathes of industrial land 40 years ago, long before the city expanded. My father was not just a mechanic, he was a silent titan of real estate. The landlord of half the logistics centers in the Midwest. "He did it, Dad," I said, sitting down on the worn sofa and tucking my legs under me. He humiliated me. He told the world I was a financial burden. Dad scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. A burden. That boy couldn't run a lemonade stand without someone holding his hand. "I need to know it is real," I said, my voice dropping. "I need to know he has no way out." Dad tapped the leather folder. "It is done. We finalized the transfer exactly 2 weeks ago, the morning after you found those texts on his phone. The title deed for the Stratosphere Tower was moved from the holding trust directly to your name. The notification period for the tenant expired at midnight yesterday." I reached out and touched the folder. It felt heavy, electric with potential. "He thinks he is untouchable," I whispered, remembering the arrogance in Julian's eyes as the security guards dragged me away. "He thinks he owns that tower. He thinks he just threw me out of his building. He is wrong." Dad said, his eyes gleaming with a fierce, protective pride. "He is just a tenant who violated his lease." I picked up the file, my grip tightening on the edges. The sadness of the betrayal was rapidly being replaced by the cold, hard resolve of retribution. "He has made a grave mistake," I said, staring at the legal seal. "He thinks he is the king of the castle, but he is about to find out he is just a squatter. To understand how the trap snapped shut with such precision, you have to rewind the clock exactly 3 weeks. It began on a Tuesday night, the kind of stillness that usually brings peace. But that night, it brought a revelation. I was walking past Julian's home office, a glass-walled sanctuary he forbade me from entering. The door was cracked open just an inch. I had intended to bring him a cup of herbal tea, but I froze when I heard him mention my name. "We need to liquidate the excess assets before the IPO launch," Julian was saying, his voice low and conspiratorial. He was on the phone with his personal attorney. "Yes, I mean Elena. She is dead weight. I need her shares and her signature on the liability waivers before we go public. If she refuses, well, make it look like she is unstable." My blood ran cold. I did not enter the room. I retreated to the guest bedroom, poured the tea down the sink, and opened my laptop. Julian thought I was just an artist, a woman obsessed with fabrics and color palettes. He forgot that to be an architect, one must understand complex systems and structural weaknesses. That night, while he slept the heavy sleep of the arrogant, I remotely accessed his private server. It was embarrassingly easy. His password was his own birthday. What I found was not just a plan for divorce, but a financial sinkhole that was terrifying in its depth. Julian was not just ambitious, he was desperate. He had lost nearly $15 million gambling on volatile cryptocurrencies and high-stakes underground poker games. He was drowning, and the sharks were circling. I found a draft of a loan application to a shadow banking consortium, a group known for breaking legs rather than charging late fees. His plan was diabolical. He intended to use the Stratosphere Dynamics headquarters as collateral for a massive emergency loan. He planned to secure the cash, dump the debt onto our joint marital accounts, and then file for divorce, leaving me with the bankruptcy while he walked away with the clean capital. But Julian had made one fatal miscalculation. He had been so busy playing the role of the big boss that he never bothered to read the fine print of the building's history. He believed he owned the tower because his company name was on the sign. In reality, the Stratosphere Tower was the property of the Vance Industrial Trust, a holding company my late mother had established decades ago. My father, Robert, was the sole trustee. When Julian moved his company in, he signed a commercial lease that he barely glanced at, dismissing it as paperwork for the in-laws. I pulled up the digital copy of that lease. There, buried on page 42, was the weapon I needed. It was a morality clause combined with a financial integrity stipulation. It stated clearly that the lease would be terminated immediately, without penalty, if the tenant engaged in any form of financial fraud, criminal activity, or moral turpitude that damaged the reputation of the property owner. 2 weeks ago, I drove out to the workshop to meet my father. We sat over a spread of blueprints and legal documents. "He is going to try to mortgage the building." "Dad," I told him, my voice steady. "He is forging my signature on the guarantor documents as we speak." Dad looked at the evidence I had gathered. He did not yell. He just took a slow sip of his black coffee and nodded. "Then we pull the rug out. But we need to make sure he has no legal standing to fight back." That afternoon, we executed a transfer of ownership. Dad signed the Stratosphere Tower out of the trust and directly into my name, Elena Vance. I became Julian's landlord. Simultaneously, we triggered the surprise audit clause in the lease. We sent a certified notification to Julian's office demanding full access to his financial records for a compliance check. Julian, in his supreme arrogance, must have seen the envelope from Vance Industrial, assumed it was a holiday card from my peasant father, and thrown it in the trash. He was so convinced that he had manipulated my family, so sure that my father was just a grease monkey who did not understand business, that he never saw the blade coming. He thought he was sacrificing a pawn to save his king, but he had no idea he was playing against the grandmasters of the game. The morning sun was likely streaming into the penthouse suite of the Stratosphere Tower right now. In my mind's eye, I could see Julian pouring a glass of vintage champagne, perhaps toasting with Bella to their newfound freedom and the massive loan he believed was about to hit his offshore account. He probably thought the hard part was over, believing that by publicly discarding me, he had cut loose the anchor dragging him down. He was wrong. He had not cut the anchor. He had severed the only rope keeping him from drowning. I was not storming the lobby to scream and throw vases. That is what amateur players do. Instead, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled conference room of the most ruthless law firm in the city, surrounded by a team of sharks in three-piece suits who cost more per hour than Julian paid his junior developers in a month. Mr. Harrison, my lead counsel, slid a document across the polished table. It was a digital copy of the loan agreement Julian had submitted to a private lending consortium, a polite term for high-interest shadow bankers. Look at the signature line. Mrs. Vance, Harrison said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. I looked down. It was a clumsy forgery of my name. Elena Vance Thorne. He had signed it yesterday afternoon, assuming that as his wife, my assets were his to leverage. He attempted to use the building as collateral to secure a loan of $50 million. Harrison continued, "He forged your consent. However, because we executed the asset protection protocol exactly 2 weeks ago, the title he presented to the bank is invalid. The Stratosphere Tower is no longer marital property or a trust asset. It belongs solely to your private LLC." And the bank I asked. "We sent a priority legal notice to the lenders at 8 o'clock this morning," Harrison replied, a faint, predatory smile touching his lips. "We informed them that the borrower has no legal claim to the collateral and that the signature was forged. The loan has been frozen immediately. The lenders are displeased. People in that line of work do not appreciate being lied to about assets." I nodded, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Julian was waiting for money that would never arrive to pay debts that were already overdue. I pulled the property management tablet toward me. As the legal owner of the building, I had master control over the building's smart infrastructure. I navigated to the tenant control panel for Stratosphere Dynamics. "It is time to enforce the lease violations," I said, with a few taps on the screen. I issued a command to the building's central computer. I authorized an immediate cessation of all utility services to floors 40 through 50, the executive suites and the server rooms. This included electricity, fiber optic internet connections, and the private executive elevators. "Services terminated due to breach of contract," I read aloud as the status bar turned from green to red. Simultaneously, my paralegal hit send on an encrypted email addressed to the entire board of directors of Stratosphere Dynamics. Attached was a dossier containing the forensic accounting of Julian's gambling debts, the proof of his embezzlement to cover those debts, and high-definition photographs of his affair with Bella Sterling, taken on company trips paid for with shareholder money. In the corner of the room, my father was on his phone. He was not speaking to a lawyer. He was speaking to Chief Miller, the head of the Chicago Police Department and his fishing buddy for the last 30 years. "Hello." "Frank, it is Robert," Dad said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Yeah, I need to report a massive fraud case and an active trespassing situation. No, not at my shop. At the Stratosphere Tower. The perpetrator is Julian Thorne. Yeah, he forged the deed." "I have the paperwork right here. Send the boys over." He hung up and looked at me, giving a sharp nod. The trap was not just set. It had already sprung. I looked at the analog clock on the wall. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. "It is time," I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. He is about to realize he is standing on very thin ice. I watched the chaos unfold in high definition on the large monitor in my lawyer's conference room. We had tapped into the boardroom's security feed, granting me a front row seat to the destruction of Julian's ego. On the screen, Julian was laughing, raising a crystal flute of champagne high in the air. Bella was leaning against him, her smile sharp and predatory. They looked like royalty surveying their kingdom. Then I pressed the execute key on my laptop. Instantly, the feed flickered as the main power grid to the penthouse was severed. The brilliant white lights of the office vanished, replaced immediately by the eerie, pulsating glow of red emergency strobes. The silence that followed was deafening. The low, constant hum of the server banks, the heartbeat of the company, died instantly. On the screen, I saw Julian stumble in the sudden darkness. The massive wall of monitors behind him, which had been live streaming the product launch to millions, went black. The connection was dead. The customer data feed was severed. The sales platform was offline. Panic erupted like a wildfire. Employees in the background were running aimlessly, their faces washed in the crimson alarm light. I saw them pressing buttons on the elevators, but the doors remained sealed tight. The magnetic locks on the glass security doors had disengaged, but the rotating mechanisms were frozen. They were trapped in a glass box. Julian slammed his champagne glass onto the table, shattering it. He grabbed the landline phone. His face twisted in a snarl as he dialed building management. "What the hell is going on up here?" Julian screamed into the receiver, his voice shaking with rage. "Turn the power back on. We are in the middle of a launch." I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I knew exactly what the building manager, a man who had worked for my father for 20 years, was saying. He was informing Julian that the new owner had ordered a cessation of services due to a severe breach of contract. "What do you mean, owner?" Julian roared, his veins bulging against his neck. "I am the owner of this building. I will fire you. I will ruin you." He slammed the phone down, but before he could catch his breath, his personal cell phone pinged with a notification. He pulled it out, and even through the grainy security camera footage, I saw the color drain from his face. It was the email from the shadow bank. "No," he whispered, staring at the screen. This can't be right. They denied it. They froze the application." The $50 million he was counting on to save him from his gambling debts had just evaporated. Beside him, Bella was having her own crisis. The head of the catering company had walked up to her, holding a portable credit card terminal. He looked annoyed. Bella swiped the company card, the platinum business card she used so freely for her personal shopping sprees. The machine beeped a harsh rejection tone. "It says declined," the caterer said, his voice audible over the ambient noise. "We are packing up." "Try it again," Bella shrieked, her composure cracking. That is impossible. There is no limit on that card." But the caterers were already pulling the tablecloths, taking the unfinished bottles of wine with them. Julian's phone began to ring. Then it rang again. And again. The shareholders were calling. The rumors of financial fraud I had leaked to the press were spreading, and with the live stream dead, the stock price was likely free-falling. Desperate, Julian rushed to his laptop. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to access the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the emergency fund he had siphoned off from the company over the last 2 years. He typed in his password furiously. He paused. He typed it again. Slower this time. "Invalid credentials," he muttered, his voice trembling. Why isn't it working? He didn't know that I was the one who had set up that encryption architecture 5 years ago. I had changed the access keys 10 minutes ago. He was locked out of his own escape route. Julian stood up slowly, looking around the darkened room. The red lights flashed rhythmically, illuminating the fear in the eyes of his staff. He looked at the locked elevators. He looked at the black screens. He looked at Bella, who was arguing with a waiter over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Then, He looked straight up at the security camera in the corner of the room. A dawn of horrifying realization broke across his face. He finally understood. This was not a glitch. This was not bad luck. Elena, he breathed, the name escaping his lips like a curse. It is her. He realized he was surrounded, cut off, and completely defenseless. And the only person capable of orchestrating such a precise, total demolition was the wife he had called useless just yesterday. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Stratosphere Tower, but this time, the security guards did not block my path. They stepped aside, bowing their heads in nervous deference. The lobby was packed with staff who were unable to work and reporters who had been camping out since the scandal broke. But as I entered, a hush fell over the crowd. I was not wearing the ruined velvet gown or the oversized sweatpants anymore. I was dressed in a tailored white suit, crisp and sharp, standing tall as the true owner of this domain. Beside me walked my father. Flanking him were two senior partners from Harrison and Associates, and behind them, a phalanx of uniformed police officers. A sudden commotion by the stairwell doors drew everyone's attention. The heavy fire doors burst open, and Julian and Bella stumbled into the lobby. They were gasping for air, their faces flushed and slick with sweat. Having to run down 40 flights of stairs because the elevators were locked had stripped away every ounce of their dignity. Julian's tuxedo was unbuttoned. His tie hung loose around his neck, and Bella was limping, holding her expensive heels in her hand while walking barefoot on the cold marble. When Julian saw me standing there, calm and untouched, something in him snapped. He let out a feral growl and lunged toward me, his hands curled into fists. You witch, he screamed, his voice raw. Undo it. Turn the power back on right now. He did not get within 10 feet of me. One of my father's bodyguards, a massive man who looked like he was carved from granite, stepped forward and blocked him. He didn't even have to shove Julian. He just stood there, and Julian bounced off his chest and stumbled back, nearly falling over. I stepped forward, holding a single sheet of paper. Julian, you are making a scene, I said, my voice cool and echoing in the high-ceilinged lobby. According to the papers my lawyer is holding, you have violated Clause 12 of your commercial lease. You are currently trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before I have you removed. Julian's eyes bulged, bloodshot and frantic. Lease, are you crazy? This is marital property. We are married. What is yours is mine. I will sue you for every single cent, Mr. Harrison stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with Julian's hysteria. Actually, Mr. Thorne, that is incorrect, the lawyer said. The building was held in a premarital blind trust and was recently transferred to Ms. Vance's sole proprietorship as an inheritance. It was never marital property. It is hers, exclusively. I took a step closer to him, letting him see the steel in my eyes. And as for the "we are married" part, I said softly, so only he and the cameras nearby could hear, you might want to check your email, if you can find a working computer. The divorce was finalized legally 2 weeks ago. While you were busy booking hotels with Bella, my team expedited the process based on irrefutable evidence of adultery. You didn't contest it because you never read your mail. You have no claim to my assets. You lost your right to a division of property the moment you committed fraud. Bella, realizing the ship was sinking fast, tried to scramble away from Julian. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. Wait. Hold on, Bella stammered, backing away. I didn't know. I was just an employee. I just did what he told me, Elena. Please. You know I am just the communications director. I had nothing to do with the money. I didn't answer her. I simply pulled out my phone and pressed play on a digital recording I had captured weeks ago. Bella's voice, clear and distinct, rang out through the silent lobby. Julian, just forge her signature. She is too stupid to notice. We need that money for the Cayman account. Bella's face turned the color of ash. She covered her mouth, realizing her own words had just condemned her. Julian, panting heavily, looked from me to the man standing silently at my right hand. He looked at the grease-stained hands, then up at the face he had mocked just yesterday. He squinted, trying to place the familiar features. Who is this? Julian rasped, his breathing shallow. Your mechanic. My father stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. He looked Julian up and down with pure disdain. The name is Robert Vance, my father said, my voice low and dangerous. You might have heard of my company, Vance Industrial Trust. I believe you have been trying to rent one of my warehouses for your server farm for 6 months. Julian's knees seemed to give out. He grabbed the reception desk to steady himself. He knew the name. Everyone in Chicago real estate knew the name. He just never knew the face because he was too arrogant to look down. Vance, Julian whispered, horror dawning on him. You are. Him. And you, my father said, pointing a finger at Julian's chest, are standing in my daughter's building. The lobby of the Stratosphere Tower transformed into an active crime scene within minutes. Uniformed officers streamed past the bewildered receptionist, heading straight for the elevators which my father had graciously unlocked for them. They returned shortly after, carrying banker boxes filled with Julian's private files and hard drives ripped from the server room. The sleek, minimalist aesthetic of the company was shattered by the chaotic reality of a federal raid. The glass doors pushed open again, but this time it was not law enforcement. It was the press. They swarmed in like a pack of wolves sensing a wounded animal. The reporters set up their tripods and microphones right in the center of the atrium, turning the very spot where Julian had destroyed my reputation 24 hours ago into the stage for his public execution. I stepped toward the bank of microphones. I did not hide. I looked directly into the lens of the lead camera. Stratosphere Dynamics is not restructuring. I announced, my voice steady and clear. It is insolvent. The financial reports released yesterday were fabricated. Julian Thorne has been operating a Ponzi scheme for the last 18 months, using new investor capital to pay off personal gambling debts. There is no new product. There is no IPO. There is only a shell company and a mountain of debt. The flashes erupted, a stroboscopic storm of white light illuminating Julian's pale, sweating face. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting to the back of the crowd. I followed his gaze. Standing near the exit were 3 men in ill-fitting leather jackets who definitely were not reporters. They stood with their arms crossed, staring at Julian with dead, shark-like eyes. These were the collectors from the underground bank, and they looked very unhappy about the news I had just delivered. Julian saw them too. The terror that gripped him was absolute. He realized that prison was now the safest place for him. He scrambled toward me, dropping to his knees on the hard marble floor in front of hundreds of witnesses and millions of online viewers. He reached out, his hands shaking violently, trying to grab the hem of my pants. "Elaine, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and grime. "You have to stop this. I did it for us. I wanted to give you the world. Don't let them take me. Please. I can fix this." He was trying to weaponize our history, using the last dregs of his charm to manipulate me one final time, but as I looked down at him, I felt nothing. The love I once held for him had been incinerated the moment he pushed me out onto the street. There is no us. "Julian," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the air between us. "There is only me and the assets you tried to steal. You wanted a divorce. You got one." Behind him, a detective spun Bella around and slammed her against the reception desk. The click of handcuffs echoed through the lobby. "Get off me!" Bella shrieked, struggling against the officer. It was him. It was all Julian. He forced me to sign those papers. I am a victim here. I am just a victim." She looked at Julian with pure hatred, her facade of the loyal partner crumbling the instant the consequences arrived. My father walked over to where Julian was kneeling. He stood over him, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket. He looked down at the man who had called him a peasant, a lowlife, and an embarrassment. "You called me poor," Dad said, his voice rumbling like an idling engine. "You said my daughter was a financial burden. You looked down on us from your ivory tower. Well, look around you. Son, the tower belongs to her. The money belongs to her. Now, tell me, who is the homeless one?" Julian let out a strangled sob. He scrambled to his feet, panic overtaking his senses. He saw the police closing in from the left and the loan sharks waiting by the front door. He spun around and sprinted toward the rear employee exit, hoping to slip out through the loading dock. He didn't make it 5 yards. A wall of people blocked his path. It was his own staff. Engineers, designers, and custodial workers stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces hard with anger. They had heard my announcement. They knew their paychecks for the last month were gone. They knew their pension contributions had been stolen. "Mr. Thorne," the lead developer said, crossing his arms and blocking the door. "We need to have a talk about our severance packages." Julian backed away, trapped between the law, the mob, and the people he had betrayed. He was completely alone. Chief Miller stepped through the line of uniformed officers, holding a folded warrant in his hand. He did not look like the jovial man who spent Sundays fishing with my father. Today, he was the embodiment of the law. He walked straight up to Julian, who was still trembling near the exit, trapped by his own employees. "Julian Thorne," Miller boomed, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd and the clicking of camera shutters. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, aggravated forgery, and embezzlement in the 1st degree. You have the right to remain silent, though I suggest you start using it immediately." As the officer behind Julian snapped the cold steel cuffs onto his wrists, Julian's eyes locked onto the leather folder in my hand, the deed to the tower, the symbol of the empire he had tried to steal. A final, desperate madness seemed to seize him. He broke free from the officer's grip with a manic surge of adrenaline, screaming like a banshee. "Give it to me," he shrieked, lunging straight for my throat with his cuffed hands raised as a weapon. "It is mine. Give it back, you thief. He never reached me." My father, who had spent 50 years wrestling with rusted engine blocks and heavy industrial machinery, stepped in front of me with deceptive speed. He did not shove Julian this time. He pulled back his right fist, a heavy hammer of bone and callus, and drove it squarely into the center of Julian's face. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dead branch snapping in a storm. Julian's head snapped back violently, and his legs turned to jelly. He collapsed to the marble floor in a heap. Blood poured from his broken nose, staining his ruined tuxedo shirt crimson. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the CEO of Stratosphere Dynamics writhing on the floor of his own lobby, defeated by a retired mechanic in a grease-stained jumpsuit. I walked forward, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone. I crouched down next to him, ignoring the blood pooling near the tips of my shoes. He looked up at me, one eye already swelling shut, gasping for air through a mouthful of blood. You ruined everything," he gurgled, spitting red foam. I leaned in close, so close that only he could hear the whisper that sealed his fate. "You wanted a memorable show for your global launch," I asked, my voice soft and deadly. "I gave you one. Enjoy the encore in federal prison." The officers hauled him to his feet. He hung limp between them, his feet dragging on the floor as they marched him toward the door. Bella was dragged out behind him, weeping loudly and cursing his name, trying to kick the photographers who were getting too close. The flashing blue and red lights from the squad cars outside painted the lobby in a chaotic scene of justice. As the automatic doors opened and they were shoved into the back of the armored police van, a roar went up from the street. It was not the adoration of fans. It was the jeering, satisfied roar of a crowd that loved seeing a tyrant fall. I turned my back on the sirens and faced the hundreds of terrified employees gathered in the atrium. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They expected me to evict them all. They expected the company to dissolve into dust right then and there. "Listen to me," I shouted, my voice commanding the vast space without a microphone. "Stratosphere Dynamics is dead. But this building, and the work you do here, is not." I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with the sycophants who had laughed when I was thrown out the night before. I pointed to the security team who had manhandled me. You, and the entire marketing team. I said, my finger slicing through the air, "Get out! Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Anyone who aided Julian in his fraud can follow them out the door right now." I turned to the engineers, the coders, and the administrative staff who looked ready to faint. "For the rest of you," I continued, my tone softening, "I am the primary creditor of this company. I am taking over operations. I am restructuring the debt, and I am personally guaranteeing your payroll for the next 6 months, if you are honest. And if you are willing to work to clean up this mess, you have a job with me." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, followed by tentative applause that quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. They were not clapping for a boss, they were clapping for a leader. I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. I looked up to see my father standing beside me. He was rubbing his bruised knuckles, but his eyes were shining with a profound emotion. He was not looking at the shy architect who used to shrink away from conflict. He was looking at a woman who had walked through the fire and forged herself into steel. "That is my girl," he said quietly, a smile touching the corner of his lips. "That is my girl. It has been exactly 1 month since the storm broke over Chicago." I sat in the corner office of the penthouse, but it no longer resembled the dark, oppressive cave Julian had built to stroke his own ego. I had stripped away the black leather and the heavy mahogany that smelled of old money and secrets. The space was now flooded with natural light, decorated in soft creams and natural wood textures, a testament to the minimalist aesthetic I had always championed but was never allowed to express. Outside, the massive sign that once read Stratosphere Dynamics had been dismantled piece by piece. In its place, gleaming silver letters now spelled out a new name, Vance Tower. It was not just a brand change, it was a flag planted on the summit of a mountain I had climbed alone. As for the former occupants of this office, their reality is far less bright. Julian and Bella are currently sitting in separate holding cells at the county detention center. Because of the high flight risk and the sheer scale of the fraud, over $50 million in missing funds, the judge denied them bail. They are waiting for a trial that will likely end with them trading their designer clothes for orange jumpsuits for the next 20 years. I threw myself into my work with a passion I had suppressed for half a decade. I did not just manage the property. I reimagined it. Using my background as an architect, I launched a massive renovation project to turn the tower into a model of sustainability. We installed solar glass and vertical gardens in the atrium. The architectural press, who once only wrote about me as a socialite wife, were now writing feature articles praising my vision for green urban living. My assistant knocked softly on the glass door and placed a stack of mail on my desk. On top was a plain white envelope with the ink stamp of the correctional facility. The handwriting was jagged and familiar. It was from Julian. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the paper. For a second, I remembered the man I thought I loved, the man who promised we would rule the world together. Then I remembered the cold rain, the public humiliation, and the cruelty in his eyes. I did not open it. I did not need his apologies, his excuses, or his lies. I fed the envelope directly into the shredder and watched as his last words to me were turned into meaningless confetti. "Knock, knock." A gruff voice called out from the doorway. My father walked in, looking out of place yet completely at home in his flannel shirt and work boots. He was carrying a dented metal lunchbox. "I thought the boss might need a break," he said, grinning as he pulled up a chair. We sat together at the imported marble desk that cost more than a luxury car. He opened the box and took out 2 ham sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a thermos of hot coffee. It was the best meal I had eaten in years. We laughed, talking about old times and new plans. The silence of the empty penthouse replaced by the warmth of family. After Dad left, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the streets of Chicago, 40 stories below. The last time I looked at this view, I was terrified, shivering in the rain, feeling like my life was over. Now, the city looked different. It did not look cold. It looked full of possibility. I realized then that my greatest asset was never the building, or the money, or the status. It was the steel in my spine that I found when I had nothing else left. I had reclaimed my name, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my soul. My phone rang, breaking my reverie. It was not a creditor or a divorce lawyer. It was the CEO of a major tech firm looking for a new headquarters. "Hello, am I speaking with Mrs. Thorne?" the voice asked politely. I smiled, looking at my reflection in the glass. "No," I answered firmly. "You are speaking with architect Elena Vance. How can I help you?" I ended the call and grabbed my purse. As I walked through the lobby that evening, the setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the floor. My heels clicked against the stone, a rhythmic, powerful sound. It was no longer the frantic pace of a woman being chased. It was the steady, confident march of a woman who had won. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.